The ballroom fell silent the moment she entered. Not the polite hush of admiration, the suffocating quiet of a guillotine blade hanging in midair. Elara Vance, the widow everyone whispered had murdered her husband, stood framed in the doorway like a ghost returning to haunt the living. And then Duke Rowan Blackwood did the unthinkable. He crossed the marble floor, every eye tracking his movement, and offered her his hand. In that single gesture, he threw away everything: his reputation, his alliances, his untouchable position. The scandal that followed would either destroy them both or burn the entire aristocracy to the ground. If you want to see how this impossible love story unfolds, stick around until the end. And don't forget to hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. The January fog rolled through London's streets like something alive, curling around gas lamps and seeping into the cracks of cobblestones worn smooth by 1,000 carriages. Inside the Ashford estate, the winter gala blazed with enough candles to bankrupt a minor lord, and the heat of 300 bodies pressed together made the windows weep with condensation. Duke Rowan Blackwood stood against the far wall, a glass of brandy untouched in his hand, watching the spectacle with the detached interest of a man studying insects under glass. "You look thrilled to be here," Lord Marcus Whitmore said, appearing at his elbow with a smirk. "Absolutely riveted by Lady Pemberton's discussion of her prize-winning roses." Rowan didn't bother looking at him. "I've attended 63 of these events in the past year. They're all the same party wearing different dresses." "Then why come?" "Because not coming would be noticed. And notice leads to speculation. Speculation leads to scandal," Marcus finished. Yes, the great Duke Blackwood, master of reputation management. Tell me, does it get exhausting, being perfect all the time?" Rowan finally turned, his gray eyes flat. "I'm not perfect. I'm careful. There's a difference." "Is there, though?" Marcus took a long drink. "Because from where I stand, you haven't made an interesting decision in 5 years. Every move calculated, every word measured. Christ, Rowan, you're 32 years old, and you move through life like you're already dead." The words hit harder than Marcus probably intended. Rowan set his glass down with deliberate care. "I have responsibilities." "You have excuses." Before Rowan could respond, a ripple moved through the crowd. Not the gentle swell of gossip, but something sharper. Heads turned toward the entrance. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the string quartet seemed to falter, though they recovered quickly. "What's happening?" Marcus craned his neck, trying to see. Rowan didn't need to look. He already knew. He'd felt it the moment the temperature in the room changed, the way you feel a storm coming before the first drop of rain. "She's here," he said quietly. "She? She who—" "Oh!" Marcus's face went pale. "Oh, no, she wouldn't. She couldn't possibly— But she could. And she did." Elara Vance stood in the doorway of the Ashford ballroom like a woman who'd forgotten how to be afraid. Or maybe she'd never known. Rowan couldn't remember anymore. 6 years. It had been 6 years since he'd seen her, and the woman standing across the ballroom bore only a passing resemblance to the girl he'd known. That girl had been soft around the edges, uncertain of her place in the world, prone to nervous laughter when the silence stretched too long. This woman was carved from something harder. She wore black. Of course she wore black. She was in mourning, though the whispers said it wasn't grief that kept her in widow's weeds, but guilt. The dress was simple, almost severe, with none of the elaborate trim and bustle that fashion demanded. Her dark hair was pulled back without ornament, no jewelry except for a single ring on her right hand. She looked like a knife in a room full of cushions. "Is that actually Elara Vance?" Marcus breathed. "I'd heard the rumors, but I thought, surely she wouldn't have the audacity to show her face in public after—" "Careful," Rowan said, his voice dropping to something dangerous. Marcus blinked. "Careful? You're defending her?" "I'm suggesting you finish that sentence very carefully." For a moment, Marcus looked like he might push back. Then he saw something in Rowan's face that made him reconsider. He held up his hands. "Fine. No judgments. But you have to admit it takes either tremendous courage or tremendous stupidity to walk into this particular lion's den." Rowan watched Elara scan the room with those dark eyes, taking in the stares and whispers with no visible reaction. When her gaze passed over him, it didn't even pause, as if he were just another face in the crowd, as if they'd never meant anything to each other at all. "It's not stupidity," he said. Then what is it? Rowan didn't answer. He was too busy watching Lady Ashford, their hostess, make her way through the crowd toward Elara. The older woman's face was pleasant enough, but Rowan had known Catherine Ashford for 2 decades. He recognized the steel beneath the silk. Mrs. Vance? Lady Ashford said, loud enough to be heard by everyone in the immediate vicinity, which, given how quiet the room had become, meant everyone. What an unexpected pleasure. Elara's smile didn't reach her eyes. Lady Ashford, thank you for receiving me. I don't recall extending an invitation. The words hung in the air like a slap. Several women gasped. A few men chuckled. Elara's expression didn't change. You didn't, but your invitation did specify all persons of quality. I assume that still includes widows, even scandalous ones. That depends, Lady Ashford said coldly, on whether the scandal in question involves murder. The gasps were louder this time. Someone dropped a glass, and the sound of crystal shattering seemed obscenely loud. Elara took a step forward, not aggressive, just present, refusing to shrink. Are you accusing me of something, Lady Ashford? Because if you are, I should very much like to hear the specifics, in front of all these witnesses. Lady Ashford's face went pink. I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm simply stating what everyone already knows. Your husband died under mysterious circumstances. You refused to answer questions. You disappeared for 2 years. 3, Elara corrected. And I didn't disappear. I went to Yorkshire. I worked. I survived. There's nothing mysterious about poverty, Lady Ashford, though I imagine it's difficult to understand from inside a house with 47 rooms. How dare you? How dare I what? Speak honestly? Defend myself? Exist? Elara's voice remained level, but something burned underneath it. You want me to disappear again, to make it easy for all of you, to play the role of the fallen woman so you can feel righteous. But I'm tired, Lady Ashford. I'm so incredibly tired of making things easy for people who've never had to be anything but easy. The silence that followed was absolute. Lady Ashford opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. You are no longer welcome in this house. Leave, now. Of course. Elara inclined her head with perfect politeness. Thank you for clarifying. I would have hated to presume. She turned to leave, and Rowan moved. He didn't think about it, didn't calculate the cost or consider the consequences. For the first time in 5 years, he simply acted. He crossed the ballroom floor in long strides, aware of every eye tracking his movement, aware of Marcus hissing his name in warning, aware that what he was about to do would change everything. Mrs. Vance, he said, and his voice carried across the silent room like a bell. Before you go, might I have a word? Elara stopped, turned, and for the first time since she'd entered the ballroom, something flickered in her eyes. Surprise, maybe. Or recognition. Your Grace, she said carefully, I wasn't aware you wished to speak with me. There are many things we weren't aware of. He offered his hand. Not the polite, distant gesture one might give an acquaintance, but the full, formal offer of a gentleman to a lady. An offer of protection, of alliance. Please, 5 minutes of your time. Behind him, he heard Lady Ashford make a strangled sound. Heard the whispers start up like flames catching kindling. Elara looked at his hand for a long moment, then at his face. Are you sure you want to do that? Yes. It will cost you. I know. They'll never forgive you. They'll try. He kept his hand extended. 5 minutes, Elara. That's all I'm asking. She searched his face for whatever she was looking for. Then slowly, she placed her hand in his. The room erupted. Not loudly. This was still an aristocratic gathering, and aristocrats prided themselves on maintaining composure even while the world burned down around them. But the whispers became a roar, and Rowan could feel the weight of 300 judgments pressing down on his shoulders. He didn't care. He led Elara through the crowd, which parted for them with the reluctance of flesh around a knife wound. Several people made small sounds of protest. Lord Pemberton actually stepped into their path, his face red. Blackwood, what in God's name do you think you're doing? Having a conversation, Rowan said mildly. I suggest you move. With a murderess? Rowan stopped, turned, and when he spoke, his voice could have frozen blood. Lord Pemberton, You have precisely 3 seconds to retract that statement. 1. Pemberton's face went from red to white. That is, I merely meant 2. Rowan, Elara said quietly. It's fine. It's not fine. It's what they all think anyway. She met Pemberton's eyes. And since no one has ever actually charged me with a crime, I believe what you just said qualifies as slander, my lord. I could sue you for that. Bankrupt you, probably. Your estate's been teetering on the edge of ruin for 3 years. Yes, I heard about that. Word travels, even to Yorkshire. She smiled without warmth. But I won't, because I have more important things to do than waste time on men who confuse cruelty with cleverness. Now, if you'll excuse us. She walked past Pemberton like he was furniture. Rowan followed, fighting down something that might have been pride or might have been terror. He wasn't sure anymore. They found an empty alcove off the main ballroom, a small space with a window overlooking the frost-covered gardens, and 2 chairs that had probably been placed there for elderly guests who needed to rest. Rowan closed the door, muffling the sounds of the party. For a moment, they just looked at each other. You've changed, Rowan said finally. Yes. You're harder than you were. I had to be. Elara sat down, her posture perfect, despite the exhaustion he could see in the fine lines around her eyes. The world doesn't have much patience for soft women. You taught me that. The words stung, though they shouldn't have. Elara, why did you do that? She interrupted. Out there. Why defend me? Because they were wrong. They think I killed my husband. Did you? She met his eyes without flinching. No. Then they're wrong. You believe me. Just like that. Yes. Why? Rowan sat down across from her, suddenly more tired than he'd been in years. Because I know you. Because you couldn't kill someone if your life depended on it. Because... He stopped, started again. Because 6 years ago, you told me you loved me, and I told you I couldn't marry you. That my duty to my family, to my position, to the expectations of society were more important than what I felt. And you looked at me with those same eyes you have now and said, Then I hope duty keeps you warm at night, Rowan Blackwood. I was angry. You were right. Elara looked away, out at the frozen gardens. What happened to you? You used to be, I don't know, more alive. I grew up, became what I was supposed to be. You became empty. Yes. The word came out rougher than he intended. I did. Silence settled between them, but it wasn't the comfortable silence they'd once shared. This was the silence of too many years and too many regrets. Why did you come back? Rowan asked. Not tonight. I mean to London. You could have stayed in Yorkshire, started over somewhere no one knew you. I tried that. Turns out you can't outrun scandal. It follows you like a shadow. Elara turned back to him. My husband's family is contesting the will. They want the small inheritance he left me. It's not much, barely enough to live on for a year, but it's all I have. If I lose it... She shrugged. Well, let's just say my options become very limited very quickly. You need a lawyer. I need witnesses. People who can testify that I wasn't the monster they claim. People with names and reputations that mean something. She smiled bitterly. Unfortunately, most people with names and reputations cross the street when they see me coming. You're the first person in 3 months who's even said my name in public without spitting afterward. Then I'll testify. Rowan, I'll testify, he repeated. I'll stand up in court and tell them exactly what I know about your character. If you need witnesses, I'll find them. If you need lawyers, I'll hire them. If you need... Why? The word came out sharp, almost angry. Why would you risk everything for me? You made it very clear 6 years ago that your reputation, your position, your perfect bloody legacy were more important than anything else. What changed? You came back, Rowan said simply. I watched you walk into that ballroom knowing everyone there wanted to see you destroyed, and you didn't flinch. You didn't hide. You didn't apologize for existing, and I realized... He stopped, searching for words that didn't sound insane. I realized I've spent 6 years playing it safe, making the right choices, maintaining my position, and I have nothing to show for it except an empty house and the respect of people I don't actually respect. You've been through hell, Elara, and you're still more alive than I am. She studied him for a long moment. You're going to regret this. Probably. They'll turn on you, ostracize you. Everything you've built can burn, Rowan said. I don't care anymore. Liar. But there was something softer in her voice now. You care. You've always cared too much about what people think. Maybe I'm tired of caring. Or maybe you're having a crisis and I'm a convenient way to rebel against everything you've spent your life building. Elara stood up. Thank you for the offer, Rowan, but I don't need a savior. I don't need someone to rescue me or fight my battles. I've learned to do that myself. I know you have. That's not what I'm offering. Then what are you offering? Rowan stood to face her, close enough to see the gold flecks in her dark eyes, close enough to smell the lavender soap she'd always favored. An alliance, partnership, two people who've both learned the hard way that reputation is just a story other people tell about you, and maybe it's time to start telling our own story. That's a pretty speech. It's the truth. Is it? Elara's voice dropped. Or are you just trying to recapture something we lost 6 years ago? Because I'm not that girl anymore, Rowan. She died somewhere between my wedding night and the day I buried my husband. This woman standing in front of you, she's harder, angrier. She's made choices you wouldn't approve of and done things that would shock the precious society you care so much about. You think you want to help me, but what you really want is to go back to when things were simple. And we can't. That door is closed. I don't want to go back, Rowan said. I want to go forward. With a suspected murderess on your arm, that's career suicide for a duke. Then I'll die. He smiled without humor. At least I'll die doing something that matters. Elara opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, the door to the alcove flew open. Lady Ashford stood there, flanked by 2 footmen and looking like Fury in a ball gown. Your Grace, I must insist that you return to the ballroom immediately. Your association with this woman is causing distress among my guests. Then they should stop being distressed, Rowan said. We're having a private conversation. You're creating a scandal. Good. Lady Ashford blinked. I beg your pardon? I said good. This entire system runs on scandal, on whispers and rumors, and the systematic destruction of anyone who doesn't fit neatly into the boxes you've created. Maybe it's time someone stood up and said that the emperor has no clothes, that your rules are arbitrary and your judgments are hypocritical, that— Rowan, stop, Elara said quietly. You're making it worse. How could it possibly be worse? Because you're burning bridges I might need to cross someday. Because you're turning this into a spectacle when I'm trying to survive quietly. Because— She turned to Lady Ashford. I apologize for the disruption, my lady. I'm leaving now. There's no need for further unpleasantness. See that you do, Lady Ashford said coldly. And Your Grace, I strongly suggest you reconsider your associations, for the sake of your family name, if nothing else. She swept out, footmen trailing behind her like trained dogs. Elara moved to follow, but Rowan caught her arm. Don't. Don't what? Don't run. Don't let them win. This isn't about winning, Rowan. It's about surviving. And sometimes survival means knowing when to retreat. She gently pulled her arm free. Thank you for the offer. Truly. But I can't let you destroy yourself for me. I've already destroyed too many things. She left before he could stop her. Rowan stood in the empty alcove, listening to the sounds of the party resuming, listening to his reputation crumbling like old plaster. And for the first time in years, he felt something other than the distant, controlled calm he'd cultivated so carefully. He felt alive. Marcus appeared in the doorway, looking pale. Rowan, what the hell just happened? I made a choice. You made a disaster. Do you have any idea what you've done? Lord Pemberton is already spreading rumors. Lady Ashford is organizing a formal complaint to the Lord Chancellor, and Lady Montgomery just declared that any person who associates with Elara Vance will not be welcome in polite society. You've become a pariah in the span of 15 minutes. Then I suppose, Rowan said, already moving toward the door, I'll have to work quickly. Work quickly to do what? To prove them all wrong. He left Marcus sputtering in the alcove and made his way back through the ballroom. The crowd parted for him now, but not with respect, with the wary distance people gave to something dangerous or diseased. Let them stare, let them whisper. He was done playing by their rules. Elara had already left the estate by the time he reached the entrance. He stood on the steps, watching her small carriage disappear into the London fog, and made himself a promise. He would find the truth about her husband's death. He would clear her name. He would stand beside her against every person who'd judged her without evidence, every lord and lady who'd used her tragedy as entertainment, every self-righteous hypocrite who'd never faced a single day of hardship in their carefully curated lives. And if it cost him everything, his title, his position, his place in this suffocating society, then so be it. Some things were worth burning for. Behind him, he heard Marcus clear his throat. "You're serious about this?" "Yes." "Even though she told you no?" "She told me no because she's trying to protect me, because she thinks I'm still the man who chose duty over love 6 years ago." Rowan turned to face his friend. "I need to show her I'm not that man anymore." "Well, or maybe you need to prove it to yourself," Marcus said quietly. "Either way, you're going to need help. Because what you're suggesting, taking on the entire aristocracy, defending a woman they've already condemned, that's not a battle. It's a war." "I know." "Good." Marcus clapped him on the shoulder. "Then let's go to war." They stood together on the steps of the Ashford estate, 2 men against a world that had already made up its mind. And somewhere in the fog-wrapped streets of London, a woman who'd been taught to fight alone tried very hard not to hope that maybe, just maybe, she wouldn't have to anymore. The game had changed, and Rowan Blackwood was done playing defense. The morning after the Ashford disaster, Rowan's study looked like a battlefield. Legal documents covered every surface: testimonies, property records, marriage certificates, death reports. Marcus sat in the leather chair by the fireplace, reading through a stack of papers with increasing bewilderment. "This doesn't make sense," Marcus said, holding up a coroner's report. "According to this, Thomas Vance died of heart failure, natural causes. There was an inquest, but it lasted all of 2 hours. No evidence of foul play, no suspicious circumstances. So why does everyone believe she killed him?" Rowan finished. He'd been asking himself the same question for hours. Because someone wants them to believe it. Who? That's what we need to find out. Rowan pushed aside a stack of documents and found what he'd been looking for: a family tree of the Vance estate. Thomas Vance had 2 brothers. Richard, the eldest, inherited the title and estate. Jonathan, the youngest, got a comfortable stipend and a townhouse in Bath. Thomas, the middle son, got nothing except the family's mounting debts and a gambling problem no one wanted to acknowledge. Marcus leaned forward. "So, he married money." "He married Elara. Her father owned textile mills in Manchester. New money, but substantial. The marriage contract stipulated that her dowry would pay off Thomas's debts, and in exchange, she'd gain entry into society through the Vance name." Rowan's jaw tightened. It was a business transaction, nothing more. "Except she was in love with you." "Yes." "And you told her you couldn't marry her because my father had just died and I had responsibilities," Rowan said sharply. "Because the duchy was in financial trouble and I needed to marry someone with connections, not just money. Because I was 26 years old and terrified of making the wrong choice." He stopped. "Because I was a coward." Marcus didn't argue. They both knew it was true. "So she married Thomas Vance instead," Marcus continued. "Moved to his estate in Surrey. And 3 years later, he's dead and she's vanished. What happened in between?" "That's what I intend to find out." A knock interrupted them. Rowan's butler, Harrison, entered with the careful neutrality of a man who'd served the Blackwood family for 40 years and had seen everything. "Your Grace, you have a visitor. She refuses to give her name, but she insists it's urgent. I've put her in the drawing room." Rowan exchanged a glance with Marcus. "Description?" "Young woman, early 20s, well-dressed but not expensively. Nervous." Harrison paused. "She says she worked for Mrs. Vance." Rowan was on his feet before Harrison finished the sentence. The woman in the drawing room was exactly as Harrison described. Young, plainly dressed, clutching a worn reticule like it might save her from drowning. She jumped when Rowan entered, and for a moment he thought she might bolt. "Please," he said, keeping his voice gentle. "Sit. You're safe here." She perched on the edge of a chair, eyes darting to the door. "Are you the Duke Blackwood?" The one who defended Mrs. Vance last night? I am. They say you're helping her. Is that true? Yes. The woman's shoulders sagged with relief so profound it was painful to watch. Thank heaven, I've been trying to find someone who would listen for months. Everyone else either didn't care or was too afraid of the family. The Vance family? Yes, sir, Your Grace. I'm sorry, I don't know the proper way to address. My name is Fine, Rowan said. What's yours? Annie? Annie Moss. I was Mrs. Vance's lady's maid at Vance Hall, from when she first married Mr. Thomas until... She swallowed hard. Until the end. Marcus had followed Rowan into the room and now took up a position by the window, arms crossed. What happened at the end, Miss Moss? Annie twisted her reticule in her hands. Mr. Thomas died. Heart gave out. Doctor said it was bound to happen. He'd been sick for 2 years, getting worse every month. The drink mostly, and the rage, and the... She stopped, face flushing. The what? Rowan asked quietly. The cruelty, sir. Your Grace. He was cruel. The word hung in the air like smoke. Rowan sat down across from Annie, keeping his movements slow and non-threatening. Tell me everything. From the beginning. And don't leave anything out because you think it might be improper or shocking. I need the truth, Miss Moss. All of it. Annie took a shaky breath. Mrs. Vance. She arrived at Vance Hall in the spring of 1844. I remember because the cherry trees were blooming and she stood in the garden for an hour just looking at them, like she was trying to memorize something beautiful before she stopped, started again. She was different then, softer. She tried to make the best of things, tried to be a good wife. And was Thomas a good husband? No. The word came out flat. He was drunk more often than sober, gambled away what little money they had, and when he lost, he'd come home and... Annie's voice dropped to almost a whisper. He'd take it out on her, never where it would show, mind you. Always careful about that. Bruises on her ribs, her back, her arms where the sleeves would cover. Once he broke 2 of her fingers and told the staff she'd slammed them in a door. Marcus made a sound of disgust. Rowan's hands clenched into fists, but he forced his voice to remain calm. Did anyone try to stop him? Who was going to stop him? He was the master of the house. His family knew. They must have known. But they never said a word. And Mrs. Vance? She never complained. Never cried where anyone could see. Just got quieter and quieter, like she was disappearing inside herself. What changed? Annie met his eyes. She stopped disappearing. About 6 months before Mr. Thomas died, something shifted. She started fighting back. Not physically, she wasn't foolish enough for that, but in other ways. She took control of the household finances, hid money from him. When he came home drunk, she'd lock herself in her room and refuse to open the door. She learned which servants were loyal to her and which ones reported to his brothers. She became, Annie searched for the word, strategic. Smart, Marcus said from his position by the window. She became smart. Yes, and it made Mr. Thomas furious. He couldn't control her anymore, and that ate at him. The last few months before he died, they barely spoke. She ran the house, managed what little money there was, and he drank himself to death in the study. When his heart finally gave out, I think part of her was relieved, which sounds terrible, I know, but it sounds human, Rowan said. What happened after he died? The brothers came, Richard and Jonathan. They went through everything, papers, accounts, jewelry, everything. They were looking for something, though I never found out what. And then Richard announced that Mrs. Vance had murdered his brother. On what evidence? None. There wasn't any. The doctor who examined Mr. Thomas said it was heart failure, plain and simple. But Richard didn't care about evidence. He started spreading rumors. Told everyone who would listen that Mrs. Vance had poisoned Thomas slowly over months, that she'd married him for his name and then killed him for his inheritance. What inheritance? Marcus asked. You said Thomas had nothing. He didn't. The estate was mortgaged, the title went to Richard, and the few personal items Thomas owned were worthless. But there was a small trust, about £2,000, that Thomas's mother had set up years ago. It was supposed to go to his widow. That's all Mrs. Vance got. £2,000 and a reputation destroyed. Rowan stood and began pacing. So Richard Vance accuses his brother's widow of murder, Not because he has evidence, but because he wants to contest the will and reclaim 2,000 pounds. I think it's more than that, Annie said. I think he wants her gone, erased. The Vance family has debts, Your Grace. Massive debts. And if people started looking too closely at their finances, at how Thomas really lived, at what kind of men the Vance brothers actually are. She shook her head. Better to create a scandal about Mrs. Vance than let anyone examine the family too carefully. A distraction, Marcus said. Make her the villain so no one looks at them. Exactly. Rowan stopped pacing and turned to Annie. Why did you leave Vance Hall? They dismissed me. Said they didn't need a lady's maid when there was no lady. But really, it was because I refused to lie about Mrs. Vance. They wanted me to testify that she was cold, calculating, that I'd seen her putting something in Mr. Thomas's tea. I told them I wouldn't perjure myself, and they threw me out without references. Her voice cracked. I've been working in a factory in Southwark for the past year. Can't get a position as a maid without references. Can barely afford rent. But I couldn't lie about her. She was kind to me when no one else was. She deserved better than what they did to her. Rowan knelt in front of Annie's chair, meeting her eyes. Miss Moss, would you be willing to testify to everything you just told me? In court, under oath, where the Vance brothers can question you? Annie went pale. They'll destroy me. Not if I protect you. I'll hire lawyers. I'll make sure you have safe housing, employment, everything you need. But I need your testimony to clear Mrs. Vance's name. And if it doesn't work? If the court sides with them anyway? Then at least we tried, Rowan said. At least someone told the truth. Annie looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded. All right, I'll testify. But Your Grace, you need to understand something. Richard Vance isn't just greedy. He's dangerous. He has connections, money, and no conscience. If you go after him, he'll come after you with everything he has. Let him try. After Annie left, escorted by Marcus to a safe boarding house Rowan kept for visiting staff, Rowan returned to his study and stared at the documents scattered across his desk. One testimony from a dismissed maid wouldn't be enough. He needed more. He needed another knock. This time, Harrison didn't wait for permission. He simply opened the door and stepped aside, revealing Elara Vance standing in the doorway like an avenging angel carved from ice. We need to talk, she said. Rowan dismissed Harrison with a gesture and closed the door. How did you know I was investigating? Because half of London is gossiping about the Duke who's suddenly interested in the scandalous widow. Because your friend Marcus Whitmore was asking questions in 3 different taverns last night. Because you're not subtle, Rowan. She moved into the room, taking in the organized chaos of documents. What are you doing? Finding the truth. I told you I don't need... I know what you told me, Rowan interrupted, and I heard you. But here's what I need you to understand. I'm not doing this to save you. I'm doing this because what happened to you was wrong. Because the Vance family destroyed your reputation to protect their own interests. And that's not justice. It's cowardice. He moved closer. And because if I don't do something that matters, something real, I'm going to spend the rest of my life as the empty man you saw at that party. So yes, Elara, I'm investigating, and no, I'm not going to stop. She stared at him, and for the first time since she'd walked back into his life, the armor she wore cracked just slightly. You spoke to Annie. Yes. She told you everything. Yes. Elara turned away, arms wrapped around herself like she was holding something broken in place. I didn't want anyone to know. It's humiliating. Being that weak, that trapped. You weren't weak, Rowan said. You survived. Surviving isn't enough. Not when everyone looks at you like you're something damaged, something less. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Do you know what the worst part is? Not the marriage, not the bruises or the cruelty or the fear. The worst part is knowing that everyone knew. The servants, the neighbors, his family, they all knew what Thomas was doing, and no one lifted a finger to help me. Because I was his wife, his property, and property doesn't have rights. Rowan wanted to reach for her but didn't dare. It's going to be different now. How? How is it going to be different? You can investigate all you want, Rowan, but at the end of the day, I'm still a woman with no position, no power, and a reputation in tatters. Richard Vance is a lord with money and connections. Who do you think the courts will believe? They'll believe the evidence. There is no evidence. Thomas died of heart failure because he drank himself to death and his heart couldn't take it anymore. There's no conspiracy, no murder, no grand revelation that will suddenly make everyone see the truth. It's just a sad story about a bad marriage that ended the way bad marriages often end, with someone dying and someone else getting blamed. Annie's testimony is evidence, Rowan said. The doctor's report is evidence. The marriage contract, the financial records, Thomas's gambling debts, it all paints a picture of what really happened. A picture no one wants to see, Elara shot back, because if they look too closely at what happened to me, they'll have to acknowledge that it happens to other women too, that their perfect society is built on the backs of wives who have no choice but to endure whatever their husbands decide to inflict. It's easier to call me a murderer than to admit the system is broken. She was right. Rowan knew she was right, but he couldn't accept it. Then we changed the system. With what? Pretty words and noble intentions? That's not how the world works, Rowan. You can't just decide to fight injustice and expect injustice to politely surrender. It doesn't work that way. Then how does it work? Elara turned back to face him, and the look in her eyes was harder than steel. You fight dirty. You use every weapon you have. You stop playing by their rules and start making your own. She stopped, seeming to catch herself. You become the thing they fear. What did you do? Rowan asked quietly. What? In Yorkshire, for 3 years. What did you do to survive? For a moment he thought she wouldn't answer. Then she smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile. I learned things, useful things. How to forge documents, how to track money through shell companies, how to gather information people don't want found. I worked for a private investigator in Leeds, a woman who specialized in helping other women escape bad marriages. She taught me that if you want to win against powerful men, you need leverage, proof, evidence they can't deny or dismiss. And do you have that? Leverage on the Vance family? Some? Elara moved to his desk and began sorting through the documents with practiced efficiency. Richard Vance has been embezzling from the family estate for years. Small amounts at first, but recently he's gotten careless. Jonathan knows but says nothing because Richard cuts him in on the profits. Together, they've stolen nearly £20,000 from tenants, creditors, and even their mother's trust. Rowan's eyes widened. That's fraud, theft, criminal activity that would land them both in prison if anyone could prove it. Elara pulled a small ledger from her coat pocket and dropped it on the desk, which is why I spent the last 6 months gathering proof. Account numbers, forged signatures, letters between the brothers discussing how to hide the money. Everything. Rowan picked up the ledger, flipping through pages of meticulous notes and copied documents. This is comprehensive. I'm thorough. Where did you get all this? I broke into Vance Hall last month, picked the lock on Richard's study, and spent 4 hours copying documents while the household slept. She said it casually, like she was discussing the weather. Also bribed 2 former servants, blackmailed Jonathan's mistress, and may have committed light treason by intercepting their correspondence through a friend at the postal office. Elara, don't. She held up a hand. Don't tell me it was wrong or illegal or beneath me. I did what I had to do to survive. And if that makes me as bad as them, then so be it. At least I'll be alive and free instead of broken and poor. Rowan set the ledger down carefully. I wasn't going to say it was wrong. I was going to say it was brilliant. She blinked. What? You're right. Fighting by their rules means losing because they made the rules. But this, he gestured to the ledger. This is leverage. Real leverage. If Richard knows we have proof of his crimes, he'll back down from the inheritance dispute rather than risk exposure. Or he'll double down and try to destroy us both before we can use it. Then we move first. Rowan began pacing again, mind racing. We file a motion to dismiss the inheritance challenge based on lack of evidence. Simultaneously, we leak information about Richard's financial improprieties to select members of Parliament who owe me favors. Not enough to prove anything, just enough to make people start asking questions. Richard will hear about it. He has spies everywhere, and he'll realize we're serious. And then we offer him a deal. He drops all claims against you, stops spreading rumors, and leaves you alone. In exchange, we don't turn over the evidence to the authorities. Elara shook her head. He'll never accept that. His pride won't allow it. Then we destroy him. Oh, Rowan said it calmly, matter-of-factly, like he was discussing crop rotations. We give the evidence to the Lord Chancellor, testify at his trial, and watch him lose everything: title, estate, freedom, all of it. You'd do that? Risk your own reputation by associating with me just to bring down Richard Vance? In a heartbeat. They stared at each other across the cluttered desk, and Rowan saw the moment something shifted in Elara's expression. Not softening exactly, but opening, like a door that had been locked for years finally being tested. Why? She asked. And don't tell me it's about justice or duty or any of that noble nonsense. I want the real reason. Rowan thought about lying, about giving her one of the acceptable answers that would maintain the careful distance between them. Instead, he told the truth. Because I've been half alive for 6 years. Because I let you walk away once and spent every day since regretting it. Because when I saw you in that ballroom, facing down an entire room of people who wanted to see you destroyed, I realized you're the bravest person I've ever known. And because... He stopped, swallowed. Because I'm still in love with you. I never stopped. And I know it's too late. I know I don't deserve another chance, but I'll be damned if I let the Vance family or anyone else hurt you again. The silence that followed felt infinite. Then Elara laughed. Not a bitter laugh this time, but something genuine and surprised. You really don't do anything halfway, do you? Apparently not. This is insane. You know that, right? Taking on a noble family, risking your position, confessing feelings that I can't... She stopped. That I don't know if I can return. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I'm not the girl you fell in love with, Rowan. That girl died in a house in Surrey. I know, and I'm not asking you to be her. I'm asking you to let me help the woman you've become. That's all. No expectations, no pressure. Just partnership. Elara looked down at the ledger, at the evidence of months of dangerous, illegal work. Partnership. Yes. Against Richard Vance, society, and probably half the aristocracy. Yes. You're either the bravest man I've ever met or the most foolish. Can it be both? She smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. All right, partners. But we do this my way. No more grand gestures in ballrooms. No more defending my honor in public where everyone can see. We work quietly, carefully, and we don't make a move until we're absolutely certain it will work. Agreed. And Rowan? She met his eyes. Don't mistake partnership for reconciliation. We're working together. That's all. Whatever we had before, it's gone. We can't get it back. I know. Do you? Because I see how you're looking at me, and I need you to understand that I can't be that person anymore. Can't be soft or trusting or open. I can't afford to be. So if you're hoping that by helping me, you'll somehow win me back, I'm not, Rowan said. Or maybe I am, somewhere deep down. But that's my problem, not yours. Right now, all I care about is making sure you're safe and free and able to live the life you want. Everything else is secondary. Elara studied him for a long moment. Then she picked up the ledger and handed it to him. Then read this. Learn every detail. Because when we meet with Richard Vance, you need to know exactly what we're holding over his head. And Rowan? Yes? Thank you for believing me, for helping, for... She trailed off, searching for words. For not being the coward you were 6 years ago. She left before he could respond, the door closing behind her with quiet finality. Rowan stood alone in his study, holding the evidence that could destroy a family or save a woman's reputation, and realized he'd just committed himself to a war he couldn't afford to lose. Outside, London continued its eternal business, carriages rattling over cobblestones, merchants hawking their wares, society moving through its carefully choreographed dance of manners and money. But inside this room, revolution was brewing, and Rowan Blackwood, Duke and devoted defender of reputation and order, had just become a rebel. The rebellion lasted exactly 4 days before Richard Vance made his countermove. Rowan was in his morning room reviewing correspondence when Marcus burst through the door, face flushed from running, clutching a newspaper like it was evidence at a murder trial. Have you seen this? Marcus threw the paper on the breakfast table hard enough to rattle the china. Rowan picked it up. The headline hit him like a fist to the gut. Duke's Madness, Blackwood, besotted with accused murderess. Below it, an editorial that managed to be both vicious and elegant, painting Rowan as a man who'd lost his senses, Seduced by a scheming widow. It detailed every moment of the Ashford ball, embellished with speculation about their private meeting in the alcove. But the real damage came in the final paragraph, where the writer, anonymous, of course, suggested that perhaps the Duke's judgment had been compromised in other areas as well. His business dealings, his political affiliations, his fitness to hold a seat in Parliament. They're not just attacking your reputation, Marcus said. They're questioning your competence, your sanity. This is character assassination. Oh, this is Richard Vance, Rowan corrected, setting the paper down with deliberate calm, even though his hands wanted to shake. He's showing me what he can do, warning me to back off before it gets worse. It's already worse. Lord Pemberton is calling for a formal inquiry into your mental state. Lady Montgomery has organized a petition demanding you recuse yourself from all parliamentary votes until you can prove you're not under undue influence. Marcus paced like a caged animal. And that's just the beginning. I've heard whispers that Vance has hired investigators to dig into your finances, your past, everything. He's going to tear your life apart looking for dirt. Let him look. Rowan stood, moving to the window. Outside, a crowd had gathered, not large, maybe 20 people, but enough to be noticed. Some held signs. He couldn't read them from this distance, but he didn't need to. He won't find anything because there's nothing to find. I've been careful my entire life. Careful doesn't matter when someone's willing to lie. Vance could manufacture evidence, plant witnesses. You're giving him exactly what he wants, a target. Then I'll need to be a moving target. Marcus stopped pacing. What does that mean? It means we accelerate the timeline. I was going to wait another week, gather more evidence, build an airtight case. But Vance isn't giving us a week. He's forcing my hand now. Rowan turned from the window. Send word to my solicitor. Tell him I want a meeting with Richard Vance. Tomorrow. Private. Just the two of us and our lawyers. You're walking into a trap. I'm walking into a negotiation. There's a difference. Is there? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're about to give him exactly what he wants, a chance to destroy you face to face. Rowan smiled without humor. Then he's going to be very disappointed. The meeting took place in a private room at Lincoln's Inn, neutral territory where neither party could claim home advantage. Rowan arrived early with his solicitor, Edmund Graves, a man whose reputation for ruthlessness was matched only by his meticulous attention to detail. Remember, Graves said as they waited, let me do most of the talking. Vance will try to provoke you. He wants you angry and off balance. Don't give him the satisfaction. I'll be the picture of calm. You'll be a man defending a woman he loves. That's never calm, no matter what face you wear. Before Rowan could respond, the door opened and Richard Vance entered like he owned the building. Tall, well-dressed, with the kind of face that looked pleasant until you noticed the coldness in his eyes. His solicitor followed, a weasel of a man named Carstairs who'd built his career defending the indefensible. Blackwood, Richard said, not bothering with titles or courtesy. I was surprised to get your invitation. I thought you'd hide behind that fortress you call a townhouse for at least another month. I don't hide, Rowan said evenly. I negotiate. There's nothing to negotiate. My brother's widow murdered him, stole his inheritance, and has somehow convinced you to throw away your reputation defending her. The only question is whether you're a fool or complicit. Graves cleared his throat. Lord Vance, we're here to discuss the inheritance dispute, not to trade insults. My client has reviewed the evidence you've submitted contesting the will, and we find it lacking in substance. Mrs. Vance's inheritance was legally stipulated in the marriage contract and upheld by proper legal channels. You have no grounds for contest. Carstairs smirked. We have grounds aplenty. The marriage contract is void if the marriage was obtained under false pretenses. And we have witnesses prepared to testify that Mrs. Vance married Thomas Vance with the explicit intention of murdering him for financial gain. What witnesses? Rowan demanded. Household staff, a doctor who will testify about suspicious injuries, a shopkeeper who sold her arsenic. Lies. Rowan's voice cracked like a whip. All of it. You've manufactured evidence because you can't accept that your brother died from the consequences of his own choices. Richard leaned forward, and his pleasant mask slipped just enough to show the venom underneath. My brother's choices? Let me tell you about choices, Your Grace. Thomas chose to marry a woman so far beneath his station that our mother wept for days. He chose to trust her with household finances. He chose to drink himself to death because living with her was unbearable, and she chose to stand by and watch him die rather than call for help. She watched him die because he'd spent 3 years breaking her spirit, Rowan shot back. Because he beat her, controlled her, and treated her like property. Annie Moss is prepared to testify to all of it under oath. The room went silent. Richard's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or calculation. Annie Moss was dismissed for theft. Her testimony is worthless. She was dismissed for refusing to lie for you, and her testimony is far from worthless when combined with the doctor's original report, the coroner's findings, and the financial records showing Thomas's gambling debts and deteriorating health. Graves pulled out a folder. We have documentation of everything. Your brother's death was tragic, but entirely natural. The only crime here is your attempt to defraud his widow. Carstairs shifted uncomfortably. Richard, however, smiled. Documentation can be disputed, witnesses can be discredited, and public opinion has already made its judgment. The court of society has found Mrs. Vance guilty, Your Grace. The legal court will simply formalize what everyone already knows. Is that what you're counting on? Rowan leaned back, forcing himself to appear relaxed, even though every muscle in his body was tight. Public opinion? Because I have to wonder, what happens to public opinion when people learn about your own financial improprieties? Richard's smile froze. I'm not sure what you mean, he said carefully. I think you do. Rowan nodded to Graves, who produced Elara's ledger and set it on the table between them. £20,000 embezzled from the Vance estate over the past 4 years. Forged documents, falsified accounts, money stolen from tenants, creditors, and your own family trust. It's all there, Lord Vance. Every transaction, every lie. The color drained from Richard's face. Carstairs picked up the ledger with shaking hands, flipping through pages that grew increasingly damning with each turn. Where did you get this? Richard's voice had lost all its smooth confidence. Does it matter? What matters is that we have it. And if this inheritance dispute goes to court, we'll make sure every page becomes part of the public record. Rowan leaned forward. Imagine the scandal, Lord Vance. A respected lord exposed as a thief and a fraud. Your title stripped. Your estate seized. Your name dragged through every newspaper in London. And for what? £2,000 you don't even need? Richard stood so abruptly his chair toppled backward. You're bluffing. You wouldn't dare use stolen documents in court. It would destroy your own reputation. My reputation is already destroyed, according to this morning's newspaper. What do I have left to lose? Rowan stood to face him across the table. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to withdraw the inheritance challenge. You're going to issue a public statement saying you were mistaken about the circumstances of your brother's death. You're going to leave Elara Vance alone for the rest of her life. And in exchange, I won't turn this ledger over to the authorities. And if I refuse? Then we both burn, but at least I'll burn knowing I did the right thing. Can you say the same? Richard stared at him with such naked hatred that for a moment, Rowan thought the man might actually lunge across the table. Then Richard grabbed his coat and headed for the door. This isn't over, he said. You think you've won because you have a ledger full of numbers? You have no idea what I'm capable of, Blackwood. No idea what I'll do to protect my family's name. Try me. Richard left, Carstairs scrambling after him like a loyal rat. Graves waited until the door closed before letting out a long breath. That went well. That was a disaster, Rowan corrected. We showed our hand too early. I wanted to frighten him into submission, but all I did was make him desperate. And desperate men do desperate things. What do you think he'll do? Rowan thought about the coldness in Richard's eyes, the barely controlled rage. Something stupid, something final. We need to warn Elara. But when they arrived at the boarding house where Marcus had secured rooms for her, the landlady met them at the door with a worried expression. She's not here, Your Grace. Left about an hour ago with a gentleman. Said something about going to Vance Hall to retrieve personal belongings. Rowan's blood turned to ice. What gentleman? Didn't give a name. Well-dressed, though. Said he was Lord Vance's man. Christ! Rowan was already moving, shouting for his carriage. Marcus appeared from somewhere, looking confused, but Rowan didn't have time to explain. Get horses. Fast ones. We need to get to Surrey now. What's happening? Richard's made his move. He's taking her back to Vance Hall, probably to force her into signing away her inheritance. Or worse. He wouldn't. He just had everything he's stolen for 4 years thrown in his face by a woman he considers beneath contempt. Yes, he absolutely would. The ride to Surrey took 3 hours that felt like 3 years. Rowan pushed the horses as hard as he dared, Marcus riding beside him, both of them silent because there was nothing to say that wouldn't be drowned out by the thunder of hoofbeats and their own fear. Vance Hall appeared on the horizon like something out of a nightmare, a sprawling estate that had once been beautiful but now showed signs of neglect, crumbling walls, overgrown gardens, windows dark except for a few on the upper floor. Rowan didn't bother with the front entrance. He went straight to the servant's door, pounding until a frightened maid answered. "Where is she? Where's Mrs. Vance?" I don't know what you... Don't lie to me. Richard Vance brought her here. Where are they?" The maid's eyes filled with tears. "The study." "But, sir, you can't... Lord Vance said no one was to disturb..." Rowan pushed past her, Marcus on his heels. They found the study on the second floor, door locked. Without hesitating, Rowan threw his shoulder against it. The wood splintered but held. Second impact. Third. On the fourth try, the lock gave way and the door crashed open. The scene inside stopped him cold. Elara stood in the center of the room, perfectly calm. A pistol in her hand pointed directly at Richard Vance's chest. Richard stood behind his desk, hands raised, face white with shock. Jonathan Vance cowered in the corner, looking like he wanted to dissolve into the wallpaper. Papers were scattered everywhere. Legal documents, the ledger, letters. "Elara, son," Rowan said carefully. "What's happening here?" She didn't take her eyes off Richard. "What's happening is that Lord Vance just tried to force me to sign a document renouncing all claims to my inheritance and admitting to my husband's murder. When I refused, he tried to lock me in this room until I came to my senses." Her voice was steady, but Rowan could see her hand shaking slightly. "So I pulled out the pistol I've been carrying since Yorkshire and suggested he reconsider his approach." "She's insane," Richard said. "You see, this proves everything I've said about her. She's violent, unstable." "Be quiet," Elara said, "or the next time I squeeze this trigger, it won't be a warning shot into your ceiling." Rowan looked up and saw the fresh hole in the plaster. "You fired at him?" "Near him. There's a difference. Although my aim isn't perfect, so I might have actually hit him if he'd moved 3 inches to the left. That would have been unfortunate." She said it like she was discussing missed theater tickets. Richard made a move toward the door. Elara shifted her aim and he froze. "Here's what's going to happen," she said, and her voice had gone cold. "You're going to sign a document I've prepared. It's there on your desk. I wrote it while you were fetching your brother, stating that you withdraw all challenges to your brother's will, that you acknowledge his death was natural, that you will make no further attempts to contact me, threaten me, or interfere in my life in any way." "I'll sign nothing. Then I'll shoot you," she said it matter-of-factly. "Not to kill, probably, maybe in the leg or the shoulder, somewhere painful but not immediately fatal. Then, while you're bleeding on your expensive carpet, I'll give this ledger and all your financial records to the authorities. Your choice, Lord Vance. Walk away from this with your freedom and a modicum of dignity, or leave here in chains, or on a stretcher. I'm flexible." "You wouldn't dare," Richard said, but his voice shook. "Wouldn't I? I've already been accused of one murder. Might as well earn the reputation." Elara's smile was terrifying in its calmness. "You spent 3 years spreading rumors that I killed your brother. You turned me into a monster in society's eyes. Well, congratulations, Lord Vance. You created exactly what you feared." The silence that followed was broken only by Jonathan's quiet sobbing in the corner. "Sign the paper," Rowan said quietly. "You've lost, Richard. Accept it." "I haven't lost until I'm dead." "That can be arranged," Elara said. For a moment, Rowan thought it might actually come to violence. Richard looked like a man weighing his options and finding them all terrible. Then, slowly, he moved to the desk and picked up the paper Elara had prepared. "Read it." His jaw clenched so hard Rowan heard teeth grinding. "I'll need a witness," Richard said. "You have 3. Elara nodded toward Rowan, Marcus, and Jonathan. Richard signed with sharp, angry strokes that nearly tore the paper. Then he threw the pen down and straightened. "This changes nothing. You'll still be a pariah. still unwelcome in society, still marked by scandal. I may have to let you keep your pathetic inheritance, but I've already destroyed everything else. Was it worth it, Mrs. Vance? £2,000 in exchange for your reputation? My reputation was destroyed the moment I married your brother, Elara said. The money is just compensation for 3 years of hell. And yes, Lord Vance, it was absolutely worth it. She lowered the pistol but didn't put it away. Now get out. This is still legally my property until the month's mourning period ends. Get out of my house. Richard moved toward the door, then stopped beside Rowan. You deserve each other, he said quietly. Two ruined people pretending they've won. But you haven't won anything, Blackwood. You've just guaranteed that neither of you will ever have a place in the world you once belonged to. I hope she's worth it. She is. After Richard and Jonathan left, Jonathan practically running for the carriage, Rowan turned to Elara. She was still standing in the center of the room, pistol now lowered but not holstered, looking like a statue carved from marble. Elara, he said gently. The pistol clattered to the floor. Her hands started shaking, then her arms, then her entire body. Rowan caught her as her legs gave out, lowering them both to the carpet amid scattered legal documents and years of accumulated hatred. I'm sorry, she gasped. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I was so scared. He locked the door and said I'd never leave until I signed, and I couldn't. You did what you had to do, Rowan said, holding her while she shook. You were brilliant. I nearly shot him. I wanted to shoot him. If you hadn't come, but I did come. You're safe now. Marcus appeared in the doorway, tactfully giving them space. The carriage is gone. I sent one of the servants to notify the local magistrate about what happened. And Rowan, there's something you should see. Can it wait? No. Reluctantly, Rowan helped Elara to a chair and followed Marcus to the desk. His friend held up one of the scattered documents, not the agreement Elara had drafted, but something else. Something older, yellowed with age. What is it? Thomas Vance's will. The original, not the copy that was filed with the courts. Marcus's face was grim. Look at the date. Rowan looked. The will was dated 6 months before Thomas's death. But that wasn't what made his stomach drop. It was the contents. He left everything to Elara, Rowan said slowly. Not just the £2,000 trust. Everything, the entire estate, all property, all assets. He changed his will and named her sole beneficiary. Why would he do that? Marcus asked. Elara's voice came from behind them, hoarse but steady. Because he knew he was dying. Because in the end, despite everything, he felt guilty about what he'd done to me. She stood, moving to the desk, picking up the will with shaking hands. He told me about this 2 weeks before he died. Said it was his apology, his way of making amends. But I never saw the actual document. Richard must have found it and hidden it. If this had been filed properly, the estate would be yours, Rowan finished, not Richard's. He's been living in a house he doesn't legally own, spending money that belongs to you. That's fraud, Marcus said. That's serious fraud. With this, we can take everything from him. Elara looked at the will for a long moment. Then she walked to the fireplace and held the paper over the flames. Elara, no. I don't want it, she said. I don't want this estate or this title or anything connected to the Vance family. Let Richard have it. Let him keep his stolen inheritance and his crumbling house and his precious name. I don't need any of it. But I could become exactly what they say I am. She pulled the paper back from the fire and turned to face them. I could use this to destroy Richard completely, take everything he has, become the vindictive widow everyone believes I am. Or I could walk away, take my small inheritance, my freedom, and my life, and leave all this poison behind. After everything he's done to you, Rowan couldn't believe what he was hearing. After he tried to destroy you? He did destroy me. The old me. The one who thought playing by the rules and being good and quiet and proper would keep me safe. That woman is dead. Elara set the will on the desk. But I won't let him create something worse in her place. I won't become the monster. I'd rather walk away with nothing than win by becoming everything I hate. She held up the will one more time, then tore it in half, then quarters, then into pieces too small to reconstruct. The fragments fell like snow, covering the carpet in a blanket of white. It's over, she said. He keeps his inheritance. I keep my 2,000 pounds and my conscience, and we both walk away from this nightmare. Rowan stared at her, trying to understand. You're letting him win. No, I'm refusing to play his game. There's a difference. Elara picked up the signed agreement, the one thing Richard couldn't take back. I have what I need. Freedom. Enough money to start over. And most importantly, the knowledge that I didn't have to become a villain to survive. That's worth more than any estate. Marcus was the one who finally broke the silence. You're extraordinary. You know that? I'm exhausted, Elara corrected, and ready to leave this place forever. But as they prepared to depart, as servants scurried to pack Elara's few belongings and ready the carriages, as the sun began to set over the crumbling estate, a rider appeared on the road. Coming fast. Urgent. Harrison, Rowan's butler, dismounted before his horse fully stopped. Your Grace, thank heaven I found you. There's been an incident in London. Your townhouse. There was a fire. Rowan's world tilted. What? Started in your study. Spread to the library and the east wing before the fire brigade contained it. They're saying... Harrison swallowed hard. They're saying it was deliberately set, and there was a message, painted on the front steps in lampblack before the fire started. What did it say? Harrison handed him a piece of paper. Someone had copied the message in careful script. Monsters burn. Rowan looked at Elara, then at the torn will scattered on the floor, then back at the message in his hands. Richard Vance hadn't accepted defeat. He'd simply changed tactics. And the war they'd thought was over had just begun in earnest. The ride back to London passed in stunned silence, broken only by the sound of hooves against dirt roads and Elara's occasional sharp breath as the carriage jolted over ruts. Rowan sat across from her, watching smoke rise in the distance. His home, or what remained of it, announcing its destruction to the London sky like a funeral pyre. Marcus rode alongside, occasionally shouting updates through the window. The fire was contained, no casualties. Most of the staff had escaped, but the damage was extensive, and worse, everyone knew it had been deliberate. He's insane, Elara said finally, her voice flat. I knew Richard was vindictive, but this? Setting fire to a duke's townhouse in the middle of London? He's desperate, Rowan corrected. We backed him into a corner with that ledger. Desperate men don't think clearly. They strike out. And now you've lost your home because of me. I've lost a building. There's a difference. Rowan, don't. He leaned forward, catching her hands before she could retreat into guilt. Don't make this about you. Richard did this because he's a coward who can't accept defeat, because he'd rather burn the world down than admit he's wrong. That's on him, not you. But if I hadn't come back, then you'd still be suffering in Yorkshire and Richard would still be embezzling from his own family. Nothing would be better. It would just be hidden. Rowan squeezed her hands gently. Sometimes things have to burn before they can be rebuilt properly. The carriage pulled up to what had been Rowan's townhouse an hour before sunset. The fire brigade was still there, damp and exhausted, surveying the damage. The east wing was a blackened shell. The study, where all his documents had been, was completely destroyed. Water and ash covered everything, turning marble floors into treacherous sludge. Graves met them at the steps, soot-stained and grim. Your Grace, Mrs. Vance, I'm glad you're safe. The damage? Rowan asked. Extensive, but not total. The main structure is sound. The west wing survived mostly intact. But the study, library, and several bedrooms are gone. The fire started with something called Greek fire, an accelerant that's difficult to extinguish with water. Whoever set this knew what they were doing. Evidence? Beyond the message? Nothing concrete yet. But witnesses saw a man leaving through the servants' entrance just before the fire started, well-dressed, moving quickly. No one got a good look at his face. One of Richard's men, Elara said. Almost certainly, but proving it will be difficult. Vance is too clever to leave a direct trail. A crowd had gathered in the street, neighbors, curious onlookers, and more than a few reporters scribbling in notebooks. Rowan could hear the whispers starting already. The speculation. By tomorrow, this would be in every newspaper in London, and Richard would ensure the narrative blamed Elara somehow. The cursed widow whose scandal follows her like smoke. We need to control this story, Marcus said, appearing at Rowan's elbow. before Vance's version becomes gospel. How? Elara asked. We can't prove he did it. We don't have witnesses who will testify. All we have is... She stopped, looked at the burned building, then at the crowd, then back at Rowan with an expression he couldn't quite read. What are you thinking? He asked. Something stupid. Something that will either save us or destroy us completely. She turned to face the crowd, squaring her shoulders. I need to speak to them, all of them, right now. Elara, you can't... Yes, I can. They want a story? I'll give them a story. The truth. All of it. No more hiding, no more careful navigation, just the facts, laid out where everyone can see them. Rowan grabbed her arm. That's suicide. The moment you open your mouth, they'll twist everything you say. Richard will have his lawyers. Let him. I'm done being afraid of Richard Vance and his threats. Elara pulled free gently. Trust me, please. One last gamble. She walked toward the crowd before he could stop her, moving with the strange calm of someone who'd already made peace with the consequences. The reporters saw her coming and surged forward, shouting questions over each other. Neighbors pressed closer. Even the fire brigade stopped their work to watch. Elara climbed onto the base of a lamppost, putting herself above the crowd, and when she spoke, her voice carried with surprising strength. My name is Elara Vance. You know me as the widow accused of murdering her husband, as the woman who's brought scandal to your streets and shame to your society, and I'm here to tell you that everything you've heard about me is both true and false. Silence rippled through the crowd. Even the reporters stopped writing. It's true that my husband died while under my care. It's true that I stood to inherit money from his death. It's true that I didn't cry at his funeral, that I left his family's home without looking back, that I've shown no remorse for his passing. She paused. But what you haven't been told is why. Thomas Vance was not a good man. He was an alcoholic who drank away what little money his family had left. He was a gambler who lost fortunes at cards and dice. And he was a man who believed that marriage gave him the right to treat his wife as property, to control her, to hurt her, to break her down until she forgot she'd ever been anything but his possession. A woman in the crowd gasped. Others murmured. Elara pressed on. For 3 years, I endured a marriage that was nothing but cruelty disguised as duty. I wore long sleeves to hide bruises. I made excuses for broken bones. I learned to be very, very quiet, because quiet women don't provoke anger. And when Thomas finally died, not by my hand, but by his own choices, his own excesses, I felt relief. Not grief. Relief. And yes, I left without mourning because I had nothing to mourn except the years I'd lost. These are lies! A man pushed through the crowd, one of Richard's associates. Rowan recognized him. Slander against a dead man who can't defend himself. Then let me show you the defense he left behind. Elara reached into her coat and pulled out a folded paper, one Rowan hadn't seen before. This is a letter Thomas Vance wrote 2 weeks before he died. It was witnessed by his doctor and sealed. I found it among his papers at Vance Hall today. Would you like to hear what it says? She didn't wait for an answer. Her voice shook slightly as she read, but she didn't stop. To whomever reads this after my death, I, Thomas Vance, write this in sound mind, though failing body, to confess that I have been a poor husband and a worse man. I have treated my wife with cruelty she did not deserve. I have raised my hand to her in anger, controlled her through fear, and broken vows I swore before witnesses. If she finds it in her heart to stay until my death rather than flee my house in the night, she is a better person than I. And if she benefits from my passing, it is no more than the compensation she is owed for enduring what no woman should. Let this stand as my testimony. Elara Vance is innocent of all crimes save the crime of marrying me. The silence that followed was absolute. Elara folded the letter carefully. Thomas's brothers have spent months spreading rumors that I murdered him. They've called me a poisoner, a schemer, a woman who married for money and killed for inheritance. But the truth is simpler and sadder. They want to destroy me because I represent everything they fear. A woman who survived, who refused to disappear quietly, who dared to claim what little I was owed. And when that wasn't enough to silence me, when I dared to accept help from a good man, she gestured to Rowan. They escalated to arson, to violence, to burning down the home of anyone who would defend me. The crowd erupted, questions, accusations, demands for proof, but Elara raised her hand, and impossibly, they quieted. I have proof. Documents showing Richard Vance's embezzlement from his own family. Testimony from servants who witnessed Thomas's cruelty. Medical records, financial statements, everything. And I was prepared to use it quietly, through proper legal channels, because I was taught that ladies don't make scenes, that good women suffer silently, that reputation matters more than truth. But I'm done being quiet. I'm done suffering in silence while men like Richard Vance burn down the lives of anyone who challenges them. So here's what I'm going to do. She pulled out the ledger, thank heaven she'd taken it from Vance Hall, and held it up. Tomorrow, I'm going to the Times, the Chronicle, every newspaper in London, and I'm going to give them copies of every document I have, every proof of Richard Vance's crimes, every testimony, everything, and they can print it all. Let society see exactly what kind of men the Vance brothers really are. You can't do that, Richard's associate shouted. It's defamation, slander. It's evidence, Elara shot back. And if Lord Vance believes it's false, he's welcome to sue me for libel. Of course, that would mean a public trial where all this evidence would be examined under oath, where witnesses would testify, where his crimes would be exposed in even more detail. Is that what you'd recommend? The man's face went red. He pushed back through the crowd and ran. Elara climbed down from the lamppost, suddenly looking exhausted. The reporters mobbed her immediately, but Marcus and Rowan formed a barrier, guiding her away from the chaos and into what remained of the townhouse. Inside, away from the crowd, Elara collapsed onto a soot-stained settee and put her face in her hands. That was either the bravest thing I've ever seen, Rowan said quietly, or the most reckless. Both probably. Her voice was muffled. I wasn't supposed to have that letter. I found it today in Thomas's desk, sealed and forgotten. He must have written it and then been too ashamed to give it to anyone, or too afraid of what his brothers would do if they found it. Why didn't you show it to me earlier? Because I wasn't sure I wanted to use it. It felt like displaying my humiliation for the world to see. But then I saw that crowd, saw how they were already creating narratives about us, and I realized they're going to talk anyway. They're going to create stories. I might as well make sure those stories are true. Marcus appeared with brandy from somewhere, passing glasses around. Well, it worked. Half that crowd was crying by the end. The reporters looked ready to canonize you, and Richard's man ran like his tail was on fire. He'll tell Richard what happened, Elara said, and Richard will retaliate. He won't let this stand. Let him try, Rowan said. You've changed the narrative. You're no longer the mysterious widow everyone fears. You're a survivor, a victim who fought back. Society loves a redemption story. Society loves whatever sells newspapers this week. Next week they'll find someone else to elevate or destroy. Maybe. But right now you've given them something more powerful than scandal. Rowan sat beside her. You've given them the truth. And truth has a way of surviving even after the gossip dies down. Over the next 3 days, London transformed into something Rowan barely recognized. Elara made good on her promise, spending hours with reporters from every major newspaper, providing documents, testimony, evidence. They printed it all: the embezzlement, the abuse, Thomas's confession, Richard's threats. The story grew with each edition, spreading through the city like the fire that had started it. Public opinion shifted with shocking speed. Women who'd crossed the street to avoid Elara suddenly wanted to shake her hand. Men who'd condemned her without evidence now questioned their own judgment. Even Lady Ashford, who'd thrown Elara out of her ballroom, sent a formal apology and an invitation to tea. But not everyone celebrated. The Lord Chancellor wants to see you, Graves announced on the third morning. Both of you, immediately. They found themselves in a private office in Westminster, facing one of the most powerful men in England. Lord Chancellor Pemberton, no relation to the fool from the Ashford ball, was 70 years old and looked like justice personified. Stern, unmovable, completely unimpressed by titles or tears. Your Grace, Mrs. Vance. He gestured to chairs. Sit. We have much to discuss. Rowan sat. Rowan. Elara remained standing until Pemberton raised an eyebrow. Then she lowered herself into the chair with visible reluctance. I've read the documents you've been distributing to the press, Pemberton said. Impressive collection of evidence. Damning, really. Richard Vance is finished politically, socially, perhaps criminally if we can make the charges stick. Good, Elara said. Is it? Pemberton steepled his fingers. You've destroyed a lord's reputation based on documents you obtained illegally. You've conducted a trial by newspaper rather than by proper legal channels. You've created a precedent that anyone with enough evidence and enough newspapers can bypass the courts entirely. The courts wouldn't have listened to me, Elara said. I'm a woman, a widow. No title, no connections, no power. If I'd filed proper charges, they'd have been dismissed before the ink dried. Perhaps. Perhaps not. We'll never know now because you decided the law didn't apply to you. The law never protected me, Elara said, voice rising. When my husband beat me, the law said it was his right. When his brothers slandered me, the law said they were entitled to free speech. When they tried to steal my inheritance, the law moved at the speed of glaciers. So forgive me, Lord Chancellor, if I decided to fight back the only way available to me. Pemberton studied her for a long moment. Then unexpectedly, he smiled. I like you, Mrs. Vance. You're angry and reckless, and you've caused more chaos in 3 days than most people manage in a lifetime. You're also absolutely right. The law has failed you repeatedly. It fails many women. That's a problem I've been trying to address for years with almost no success. He stood, moving to the window. But now you've forced the issue into public consciousness. Every newspaper is running stories about spousal abuse, about property rights, about the legal protections, or lack thereof, available to married women. You've started a conversation this country needed but was too cowardly to have. Then why are we here? Rowan asked. Because Richard Vance has filed a formal complaint. He's demanding that Mrs. Vance be charged with theft, defamation, and inciting public unrest. He wants her arrested and tried. Elara went pale. Rowan stood. On what grounds? On the grounds that she stole documents from his property, published falsehoods about his character, and created a public disturbance that resulted in property damage. Namely, the fire at your townhouse, Your Grace, which he's now claiming was set by an angry mob inspired by Mrs. Vance's inflammatory speeches. That's insane, Marcus said from his position by the door. Richard set that fire himself. Can you prove it? No, but then in the eyes of the law, it's one accusation against another, and Lord Vance has better lawyers. Pemberton turned back to them. Here's the situation. I can make these charges disappear. I have that power. But in exchange, I need something from both of you. What? Elara asked warily. Testimony. Under oath. In front of a special committee I'm forming to investigate the legal rights of married women. I want every detail of what you endured, Mrs. Vance. Every bruise, every threat, every moment of fear. I want it recorded officially so that when we present reforms to Parliament, we have real cases to point to. Not theoretical concerns, but actual testimony from actual women. You want me to relive the worst years of my life in front of a committee of strangers? Elara's voice shook. To be questioned and doubted and picked apart by lawyers trying to prove I deserved what happened? Yes. Pemberton didn't soften it. That's exactly what I want. Because your story matters, Mrs. Vance. It could change laws. It could save other women from enduring what you endured. But only if you're willing to tell it properly, through proper channels, where it can be used to create actual reform. Elara looked at Rowan. He saw the fear in her eyes, the exhaustion, the part of her that just wanted to run back to Yorkshire and never face another courtroom or committee or judgment again. I'll do it, she said, on one condition. Any reforms that come from this, they protect other women, not just wealthy ones, not just ones with connections. All women, servants, factory workers, everyone. Or I keep my testimony to myself. Pemberton's smile widened. You drive a hard bargain, Mrs. Vance. I've had good practice. Very well, you have my word. Now, as for you, Your Grace, he turned to Rowan, I need you to stop being quite so noble. Your public defense of Mrs. Vance has been admirable, but it's also created a problem. Half of society sees you as a romantic hero. The other half sees you as a fool besotted by a beautiful woman. Neither perception is helpful if you want to actually accomplish something. What would you suggest? Rowan asked. Marry her? The room went silent. Elara stood so fast her chair toppled backward. Absolutely not. Why not? Pemberton asked reasonably. You're both unmarried adults. You clearly care for each other. Marriage would give Mrs. Vance legal protection and social standing. It would transform your relationship from scandalous to respectable overnight. It would make me property again, Elara said. Under law, everything I own would become his. Every right I've fought for would disappear. I'd go from being an independent widow to being a wife, and wives have no legal existence separate from their husbands. So no, absolutely not. Even if it would help your case? Especially if it would help my case. I won't trade one form of ownership for another, no matter how well-intentioned. Pemberton looked at Rowan. Your Grace? Thoughts? I agree with her, Rowan said, though it cost him something to say it. Marriage under current law would strip away everything she's gained. If that's the price of respectability, it's too high. Interesting. Pemberton returned to his desk. Then we'll do it differently. Mrs. Vance testifies before the committee. We use her story and Annie Moss's testimony and the doctor's records and everything else to push through reforms. In the meantime, you both maintain separate residences, separate lives, but present a united front to society. Let them speculate all they want about the nature of your relationship. Speculation isn't scandal if you refuse to be ashamed. And Richard? Elara asked. Richard Vance will be quietly encouraged to retire from public life. His brother Jonathan will likely join him. The investigation into their embezzlement will proceed slowly but thoroughly. By this time next year, the Vance name will be associated with fraud and failure, not murder accusations. Pemberton's expression hardened. But understand this, Mrs. Vance. If you step out of line, if you publish more documents without proper authorization, if you continue conducting warfare via newspaper instead of law, I will not protect you. I'm offering you a chance to do this properly. Don't make me regret it. I won't, Elara said. Good. Now get out of my office. I have actual criminals to deal with. They left Westminster in a daze. Outside, London continued its business, carriages, merchants, life moving forward as it always did. But something felt different, lighter maybe. Like a storm had passed and left the air cleaner in its wake. Did that really just happen? Marcus asked. I think so, Rowan said. I'm not entirely certain. Elara started laughing, not the bitter, desperate laughter from before, but something genuine and a little wild. We did it. We actually did it. Richard's finished, I'm free, and the Lord Chancellor is on our side. How is this possible? You made it possible, Rowan said, by refusing to stay silent, by fighting back even when fighting seemed impossible. We fought back, she corrected. You lost your home, Rowan, your reputation. Everything you'd built can be rebuilt, and will be differently this time. Better. He took her hand, not caring who saw. You asked me once why I was willing to risk everything for you. This is why. Because watching you fight, watching you refuse to break no matter what they threw at you, it reminded me what courage looks like, what actually matters. Not reputation or position or society's approval, just truth, justice. Standing up even when standing up costs everything. Elara looked at their joined hands. The Lord Chancellor was right about one thing. People are going to speculate about us. Let them. They'll call you foolish, say I've bewitched you. I am foolish, and you have bewitched me. But that's my choice to make. She met his eyes, and for the first time since she'd walked back into his life, she smiled without armor. You're impossible. I learned from the best. 3 weeks later, Elara stood before the Chancellor's Committee in a private room in Westminster. Rowan wasn't allowed inside, witnesses testified alone, but he waited in the corridor with Marcus, pacing like a caged animal. She's strong, Marcus said. She'll be fine. She shouldn't have to be this strong. Shouldn't have to relive trauma for strangers just to prove she deserves basic rights. No, but until the laws change, this is how change happens. One testimony at a time. One woman brave enough to speak. The door opened. Elara emerged looking drained but intact. Behind her, Pemberton nodded to Rowan. Powerful testimony. Very powerful. We'll use it well. Rowan didn't care about political implications. He only cared about the woman in front of him, who'd just survived something most people would never have the courage to face. How do you feel? He asked. Tired, angry, relieved. Elara took a shaky breath, but also hopeful. They listened, Rowan. They actually listened. Some of them looked horrified. One man was crying. They didn't dismiss me or doubt me or treat me like I was lying. They just listened. Because your story deserves to be heard. It shouldn't be exceptional. That's what keeps getting me. I'm not special. Thousands of women endure what I endured or worse. The only difference is I had resources, education, the ability to fight back. Most women don't. But maybe, she looked back at the closed door, maybe this is the beginning of something. Maybe other women will see that fighting back is possible and they'll find their own courage. They will, Marcus said, because you showed them how. That evening, the first newspaper ran a front-page story. Vance Scandal. Committee. Here's testimony. It detailed nothing specific. The testimony was sealed, but it confirmed that the Chancellor's Committee was investigating legal reforms based on credible accounts of spousal abuse. By morning, 5 more newspapers had picked up the story. By afternoon, women were gathering outside Westminster demanding to be heard, to tell their own stories, to contribute their own testimonies to the growing record. The movement Elara had started accidentally, in a moment of desperate honesty in front of a crowd, had grown beyond her, beyond any of them. Richard Vance made one final attempt at retaliation. A formal accusation delivered through his lawyers, claiming all the charges against him were fabricated. The accusation lasted exactly 6 hours before 2 of his former servants came forward with additional evidence, and Jonathan Vance himself broke ranks to testify against his brother in exchange for immunity. Richard was arrested that same evening for fraud and embezzlement. The trial would take months. The legal reforms would take years. But the tide had turned, and everyone knew it. Rowan stood at the window of his temporary lodgings. He'd rented a house in Belgravia while his townhouse was being rebuilt, and watched London light its evening lamps. Somewhere out there, Elara was in her own rented rooms, probably reading through legal documents and preparing for tomorrow's interviews. They'd agreed to maintain separate households, at least for now, to let society speculate without giving them definitive answers. It was strange, frustrating, nothing like what he'd imagined when he'd first decided to help her, but it felt right. A knock on the door. Marcus entered without waiting for permission. "You have a visitor. Says it's urgent." "Who?" "Lady Ashford." Rowan blinked. The woman who'd thrown Elara out of her ballroom, who'd organized petitions against him, who'd called Elara a murderess to her face? She entered like a woman approaching a battlefield, shoulders back but eyes uncertain. "Your Grace," she said formally. "Thank you for seeing me. I know I have no right to your time after how I behaved, but I needed to speak with you, and with Mrs. Vance, if she's willing." "What about?" Lady Ashford's careful composure cracked. "An apology. A real one. Not the formal note I sent, but I need to say this properly. I was wrong about Mrs. Vance. Horribly, viciously wrong. And I'm not the only one. Half of society is reassessing their judgments. The other half is too proud to admit fault. But I can't—" She stopped, started again. "My own marriage was not easy, Your Grace. Not like what Mrs. Vance endured, but not easy. And I said nothing. Did nothing. Just accepted that wives endure and husbands control, and that's simply how things are. But watching Mrs. Vance fight back, reading her testimony, seeing what's possible when someone refuses to accept injustice, it's made me question everything." "Tell her," Rowan said quietly. "Not me. Her. She's the one who deserves your apology." "Will she see me?" "I don't know, but you should ask." Lady Ashford nodded and left, moving like a woman who'd just realized the ground beneath her feet had been quicksand all along. Rowan returned to the window. Somewhere in the city, battle lines were being redrawn. Old alliances were crumbling, new ones were forming, and at the center of it all, a woman who'd been told to disappear, to be quiet, to accept her fate, had instead stood up and changed everything. Not perfectly, not without cost, but undeniably, permanently. The world hadn't finished turning yet, but for the first time in years, Rowan felt like it might be turning in the right direction. 6 months after Richard Vance's arrest, London prepared for the trial everyone had been waiting for. The courtroom at the Old Bailey had been expanded to accommodate the crowds. Nobles, reporters, reformers, women who'd never set foot in a courthouse before, but came anyway because this trial represented something larger than one man's crimes. Rowan stood outside the courthouse doors, waiting. Elara had gone in early to meet with Pemberton and the prosecution lawyers, leaving him to pace the street like a sentry. Marcus leaned against a lamppost nearby, looking amused. "You're going to wear a trench in the cobblestones." "I'm fine." "You're terrified. It's written all over your face." Rowan stopped pacing. "She's about to be cross-examined by Richard's defense team. They're going to try to destroy her credibility, paint her as a liar, make her relive every moment of trauma she spent 6 months trying to process. So yes, Marcus, I'm terrified. She's handled worse. That doesn't make this easier." The courthouse doors opened. Annie Moss emerged, pale but steady, flanked by 2 women from the Legal Reform Society that had sprung up around Elara's testimony. They'd been called as character witnesses, providing context about the conditions at Vance Hall. Annie caught Rowan's eye and nodded. "Mrs. Vance is stronger than all of them," she said quietly. "You'll see." Inside, the courtroom was a study in contrasts. On one side sat Richard Vance and his legal team, 3 of London's most expensive barristers, men who specialized in defending the indefensible. Richard looked smaller than Rowan remembered, diminished by months in custody awaiting trial, but his eyes still burned with hatred when they landed on the prosecution table. On the other side sat Elara, Graves, and 2 prosecutors from the Crown. Elara wore a simple gray dress, her hair pulled back severely. No jewelry except for her wedding ring, not the one from Thomas, but a plain band she'd bought herself, a symbol of independence rather than marriage. She looked composed, but Rowan saw her hands clasped tightly in her lap, knuckles white. The judge entered. Lord Justice Harrington, known for his fairness but also his impatience with theatrics. The trial began. The prosecution laid out their case methodically. Documents proving embezzlement, testimony from accountants who'd traced the missing funds, letters between Richard and Jonathan discussing how to hide their crimes. It was damning, professional, and utterly devastating. Then came Elara's turn. She took the stand with the same calm she'd shown walking into the Ashford ballroom, and for the first 2 hours the prosecution's questions were gentle, establishing timeline, confirming documents, building the narrative of what had happened at Vance Hall. Then Richard's lead barrister stood for cross-examination. Lord Edmund Thorpe was 60 years old and looked like someone's kindly grandfather. He approached Elara with a gentle smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mrs. Vance, you've painted a rather grim picture of your marriage, a tale of abuse and suffering, yet you never sought help from authorities, never filed a complaint, never even told your own family what was allegedly happening. Why is that?" "Because women who complain about their husbands are dismissed as hysterical," Elara said evenly. "Because the law gives husbands authority over their wives and considers what happens within a marriage private business. Because I knew no one would help me. Or perhaps because nothing was actually happening. Perhaps this entire narrative of abuse has been constructed after the fact to justify your theft of family documents. I didn't steal anything. I copied documents that proved Richard Vance was embezzling from his own family. Documents you obtained illegally, through breaking and entering, through bribery and blackmail." Thorpe's voice remained gentle, but his words cut. "You've admitted to multiple crimes in pursuit of what you call justice. How are you any different from the man you're accusing?" "Because I didn't steal from widows and orphans," Elara shot back. "I didn't use my position to defraud people who trusted me. I gathered evidence of actual crimes committed by powerful men who thought they were untouchable." "Ah, yes, the powerful men. You seem to have quite a vendetta against powerful men, Mrs. Vance. Your husband was one. Richard Vance is one. Even Duke Blackwood, who sits in this courtroom supporting you. He's one of the most powerful men in England. Are we to believe you're suddenly comfortable with power? Or is this relationship simply another calculated move on your part?" Rowan half stood before Marcus grabbed his arm. Elara's expression didn't change. "My relationship with Duke Blackwood is none of this court's concern. On the contrary, it's very much our concern. Because it speaks to your character, Mrs. Vance, your motives. You've made yourself the heroine of a tragic story. But what if the truth is simpler? What if you're simply a woman who married above her station, became bitter when the reality didn't match the dream, and decided to destroy the family that had given you everything?" "They gave me nothing," Elara said, voice rising slightly. "Thomas gave me bruises and fear. Richard gave me slander and threats. The only thing the Vance family ever gave me was reasons to escape. Yet you stayed for 3 years. If things were truly as terrible as you claim, why not leave? Where would I go? To my parents, who had used my dowry to pay their own debts and wouldn't take me back without it? To the streets? To a workhouse? Elara leaned forward. You ask these questions like they have simple answers, like a woman in my position had choices. But I didn't. The law didn't give me choices. Society didn't give me choices. The only choice I had was between enduring and dying, so I chose to endure until I could find another way out. And when your husband conveniently died, there was nothing convenient about it, Elara interrupted. Thomas Vance drank himself to death over 2 years while I watched helplessly. His heart failed because he damaged it beyond repair with alcohol and rage. I didn't kill him. His own choices killed him. But yes, when he died, I felt relief. Does that make me a monster, or does it make me human? The courtroom had gone silent. Even Thorpe seemed momentarily at a loss. Let me ask you directly, Mrs. Vance. Did you poison your husband? No. Did you in any way hasten his death? No. Did you benefit financially from his death? I received £2,000 from a trust his mother had established. That's all. Richard received the estate, the title, everything of actual value. So, if we're questioning motives based on financial gain, perhaps you should be cross-examining your own client. Thorpe's pleasant mask cracked. Mrs. Vance, you will answer the questions asked, not redirect. I am answering the questions. You want to paint me as a calculating murderess who married for money and killed for inheritance. But the facts don't support that story, so you're trying to twist them until they do. The truth is simpler and less dramatic. I was a woman in an impossible situation who survived the only way I could, and when Richard Vance tried to destroy me to cover his own crimes, I fought back. That's all. You admit to fighting back, to taking matters into your own hands rather than trusting the legal system that's currently trying a nobleman for embezzling £20,000 because a woman broke into his house and copied his private documents. Elara smiled without humor. Yes, I took matters into my own hands because the legal system had failed me repeatedly, and I'd do it again. The judge cleared his throat. Mrs. Vance, I'd advise against admitting to criminal acts on the witness stand. Why? Everyone here knows what I did. It's been in every newspaper for months. I broke into Vance Hall. I copied documents without permission. I blackmailed Jonathan Vance's mistress for information. I did all of it because it was the only way to prove the truth. And if that makes me a criminal, then I'm a criminal who exposed a bigger criminal. At least I can sleep at night. Thorpe tried several more approaches, questioning her character, her motives, her relationship with Rowan. But Elara didn't break. She answered every question with the same steady honesty that had first captured the public's attention 6 months ago. No theatrics, no tears, just facts delivered with the weight of someone who'd earned every word. When she finally stepped down from the stand, the prosecution rested its case. Richard's defense lasted 3 days and accomplished nothing. His lawyers couldn't explain away the documents, couldn't discredit the witnesses, couldn't provide any alternative explanation for where the money had gone. They tried to paint Richard as a victim of a vindictive widow and an ambitious duke, but the evidence told a different story. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood and pronounced Richard Vance guilty on all counts: embezzlement, fraud, falsifying documents, theft. The judge sentenced him to 15 years hard labor, stripped him of his title and holdings, and ordered restitution to everyone he'd defrauded. Richard stood to hear the verdict with the same aristocratic composure he'd worn throughout the trial. But when the guards moved to escort him out, when he passed the prosecution table and saw Elara sitting there looking like the personification of justice, something in him snapped. "This isn't over," he hissed, low enough that only those nearby could hear. "You think you've won? You've destroyed everything. My family, my name, my life. And for what? £2,000 and the approval of people who'll forget about you the moment the next scandal breaks. You're nothing, Elara Vance. You'll always be nothing." Elara stood to face him. "I know," she said quietly. "I'm nobody special. Just a woman who refused to disappear quietly when that's what you wanted. And you're right, people will forget about me. But they won't forget what this trial proved. that powerful men aren't untouchable, that women can fight back, that justice is possible even when the system is rigged against it. So thank you, Richard. Thank you for being exactly awful enough to prove why reform is necessary. Richard looked like he wanted to say more, but the guards pulled him away, and the last Rowan saw of the man was his face twisted with impotent rage as he was led down to the cells below the courthouse. The courtroom erupted the moment the door closed. Reporters mobbed Elara. Well-wishers crowded forward. Even the judge allowed himself a small smile before calling for order and dismissing the court. Outside, the crowd that had gathered during the trial's final hours cheered when Elara emerged. Not just women, though they were the majority, men too, working class and noble alike. People who'd followed the case and seen something larger than one widow's vendetta. Someone had made banners. Justice for Elara. Reform now. End coverture. Elara stopped on the courthouse steps, looking at the crowd with something like wonder. I didn't expect this, she said quietly. You started a movement, Rowan said, standing beside her, whether you meant to or not. I just wanted to survive. You did more than survive. You showed people what's possible. A reporter pushed forward. Mrs. Vance, how does it feel to finally have justice? Elara considered the question. Expensive, she said finally. Justice cost me 3 years of my life, my reputation, my sense of safety. It cost Duke Blackwood his home and his position in society. It cost Annie Moss her career and her references. Justice isn't free, and it isn't easy. And I want people to understand that. Fighting back has consequences. But she looked at the crowd, at the women holding banners, at the reporters scribbling her words. But the alternative is worse. The alternative is silence, and silence only protects the people who benefit from injustice. What will you do now? Rebuild, Elara said. Rest. Help push the legal reforms through Parliament. And maybe, she glanced at Rowan, maybe learn to trust again. It's harder than fighting, but I'm told it's worth the effort. The interview continued, but Rowan stepped back, giving her space. Marcus appeared at his elbow. That was quite a speech. That was truth. She's good at that. So are you, apparently. Half the Reform Committee wants to nominate you for a seat on the Judicial Review Board. The other half thinks you're too radical. I'll take radical. I thought you might. They watched Elara handle the crowd with the same grace she'd shown on the witness stand, tired but unbroken, honest but not defeated. She'd changed in the 6 months since the investigation began, grown harder in some ways, softer in others, more certain of herself, less willing to accept easy answers or comfortable lies. Eventually, the crowd dispersed, driven away by approaching rain. Elara found Rowan waiting by his carriage, looking patient. Offer still stands, he said. Separate residence, separate life, but partnership, if you want it. Elara smiled. I want it. But Rowan, I need you to understand something. I'm not going to become the woman you remember from 6 years ago. That girl is gone. This woman standing in front of you is harder, angrier, more difficult to love. She has nightmares. She carries weapons. She trusts slowly and forgives even slower. She's not perfect, Rowan finished. Good. Perfect is boring. Perfect doesn't change the world. I don't want the girl from 6 years ago, Elara. I want this woman, the one who faced down a courtroom full of people determined to break her, the one who burns down systems and builds new ones, the one who's teaching me what courage actually looks like. Even if I never marry you, even if I keep my independence and my name and my separate household, especially then, I don't want to own you, Elara. I want to stand beside you while you own yourself. She studied him for a long moment. Then she took his hand. All right, partnership. But I'm keeping the pistol. I wouldn't dream of asking you to give it up. 3 months later, Parliament passed the first round of legal reforms based on the Vance case testimony. The Married Women's Property Act of 1848 gave wives the right to own property separately from their husbands, the right to enter contracts, and the right to sue for separation in cases of abuse. It wasn't perfect. There were loopholes, compromises, concessions to the conservatives who'd fought every provision, but it was a start. Elara stood in the gallery of Parliament with Annie Moss and Lady Ashford, an unlikely alliance that had formed during the trial's aftermath, and watched the vote tally. When the reforms passed by a narrow margin, the three women looked at each other and smiled. "This is just the beginning," Lady Ashford said. "There's still so much to change." "Then we keep fighting," Annie said, "one law at a time." "One testimony at a time," Elara added, "until every woman knows she has options, that she's not trapped, that survival is possible." They left Parliament together, three women from completely different worlds, united by the knowledge that the world could be changed if enough people refused to accept injustice. Rowan met Elara outside, offering his arm. She took it, no longer afraid of what people would say or think. Let them speculate, let them gossip. The worst they could say about her had already been said, and she'd survived it. "Where to?" he asked. "Home," she said, then corrected herself. "My home. The house I bought with my inheritance, the one with my name on the deed and my furniture and my books. Want to see it?" "I'd love to." They walked through London as evening settled over the city, turning gas lamps into small stars against the gathering dark. The house Elara had purchased was modest, nothing like Vance Hall or Rowan's rebuilt townhouse, but it was hers completely. No husband's name on the property, no family controlling the finances, just a woman and her independence, hard-won and carefully guarded. Inside, Elara poured them both wine, and they sat in her small library, surrounded by books she'd chosen herself. "Do you ever regret it?" Rowan asked. "Coming back to London? Fighting instead of hiding?" Elara considered. "Sometimes. Usually around 3 in the morning when the nightmares wake me up. But then I remember what we accomplished, the laws we changed, the women who've written to me saying they left abusive marriages because they saw it was possible. And I think, maybe it was worth it. Maybe all the fear and pain and struggle added up to something meaningful. It did. You changed everything. We changed everything. I couldn't have done it alone. But you started it. That first night at the Ashford Ball when you refused to shrink, when you stood there and met their judgment without apologizing, that's when things began to shift." Elara set down her wine glass and moved to the window. Outside, London continued its eternal noise and motion. "I was so angry that night, so tired of being afraid. I thought they'd destroy me for daring to show my face. Instead," she shook her head, "instead I destroyed them. Or at least I destroyed the system that protected them." "Some of them," Rowan corrected, joining her at the window. "There are still Richards out there. Still men who believe wives or property and power means impunity. We haven't won the war, Elara. Just a battle. Then we'll keep fighting, as long as it takes." They stood together, looking out at the city they'd both changed and been changed by, and Rowan realized something he'd been too careful to acknowledge before. This was enough. This moment, this partnership, this shared purpose. It was more than he'd ever hoped for when he'd watched her walk into that ballroom 6 months ago. "I love you," he said quietly. "Not because you're perfect or fixed or healed, not because you've overcome your trauma or forgiven the people who hurt you. I love you because you're still fighting, because you turned your pain into purpose, because you're the bravest person I've ever known." Elara turned to face him, eyes bright with tears she didn't bother to hide. "I'm not brave. I'm just stubborn." "Same thing, really. And I don't know if I can love you back. Not the way you deserve. I'm too broken, too guarded." "Then don't love me back," Rowan said. "Just let me stand beside you. Let me be part of whatever comes next. That's all I'm asking." She reached up and touched his face, fingers gentle against his jaw. "You're impossible. I learned from the best." She kissed him then, tentative and careful, like someone testing whether something precious might shatter. It wasn't the passionate reunion of romantic stories. It was quieter than that, more uncertain, weighted with all the trauma and fear and gradual trust they'd been building over months of partnership. But it was real. And for both of them, real was worth more than perfect. When they finally pulled apart, Elara smiled. Not the armored smile she showed the world, but something genuine and a little scared. "Partnership," she said, "with the possibility of more. Someday. When I'm ready. Whenever you're ready. No pressure, no expectations." "You're really going to wait for a woman who might never be able to fully trust again?" "Yes." "You're an idiot." "Probably, but I'm your idiot if you'll have me." Elara laughed, and the sound was lighter than any he'd heard from her before. All right, you can be my idiot, but I'm still keeping my separate household and my independence and my pistol. I wouldn't have it any other way. Outside, London prepared for another night. In Parliament, reformers plotted their next moves. In courtrooms, women cited the Vance precedent to argue for their own rights. In drawing rooms across the city, conversations were happening that would have been unthinkable a year ago, about marriage, about power, about what women deserved and what they'd no longer tolerate. The world was changing, slowly, painfully, with setbacks and compromises at every turn. But it was changing. And in a modest house in Belgravia, two people who'd learned the hard way what courage cost stood together at a window and watched the lights of London come on like promises being kept, one by one, against the gathering dark. The scandal that had threatened to destroy them had instead transformed them. The society that had condemned them had been forced to confront its own ugliness. The system that had protected powerful men had developed its first cracks. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. There was no magical healing, no perfect resolution, no promise that everything would be easy from here. But it was honest. It was hard-won. And it was theirs. Rowan turned from the window and saw Elara watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "What?" he asked. "I'm just thinking about how different things could have been. If you hadn't walked across that ballroom. If you'd chosen safety over truth." "But I didn't." "No, you didn't, and that's what I'm grateful for. Not the rescue. I didn't need rescuing. But the witness. Someone willing to stand beside me and say, yes, I see it too. Yes, this is wrong. Yes, we should fight. That's what made the difference. We make a good team." "We do." Elara picked up her wine glass again, raising it slightly. "To partnership." "To partnership," Rowan echoed, touching his glass to hers. "And to whatever comes next, as long as what comes next involves justice, reform, and thoroughly annoying every conservative lord in Parliament. Obviously." They drank, and the wine tasted like victory. Complicated, earned, imperfect, but real. Outside, the city they'd fought for continued its endless transformation. Change was slow, painful, resisted at every turn. But it was happening. Because one woman had refused to disappear. Because one man had chosen truth over comfort. Because enough people had looked at injustice and decided it was worth the cost to fight. The story didn't end here. There would be more battles, more setbacks, more nights when the nightmares came and the doubts seemed overwhelming. The work of changing a system was never finished. It was an ongoing commitment, a choice made new each day. But tonight, in this moment, with wine and honest conversation and the tentative beginnings of trust, it was enough to have come this far. Elara set down her glass and moved back to the window. Rowan joined her, and they stood shoulder to shoulder, watching London prepare for sleep. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For believing me when no one else would. For standing beside me when standing alone would have been easier. For helping me prove that the world can change if enough people refuse to accept the way things are. You did the hard part. I just followed your lead." "Liar." But she smiled. "We both know you risked everything. Lost everything, really. Your position, your reputation, your perfect controlled life. And gained something better. Purpose, partnership, you." "I'm not a prize to be won, Rowan Blackwood." "I know. You're a force of nature to be respected and occasionally feared. Much more interesting than a prize." She laughed, and the sound carried relief and exhaustion and something that might have been joy if joy knew how to exist alongside trauma. They stood there as the stars came out over London, two people who'd learned that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. That justice wasn't given freely but taken, and that love, real love, the kind that survived fire and scandal and society's condemnation, was worth every risk, every loss, every moment of terror along the way. The Duke who'd been too careful to live fully had learned to be reckless for the right reasons. The widow who'd been taught to disappear had learned to take up space unapologetically. And together, they'd proved that the world wasn't fixed, that systems could be changed, that power could be challenged, and that sometimes the greatest rebellion was simply refusing to stay silent when silence was expected. Their story would be told in newspapers and courtrooms and drawing rooms for years to come. Some would romanticize it, turning suffering into poetry. Others would condemn it, calling Elara a troublemaker and Rowan a fool. But those who'd lived through it, who'd seen the actual cost and the actual victory, would know the truth. That change was possible. That justice, however delayed, could be achieved. That survival wasn't just endurance, but transformation. And that sometimes the most revolutionary act was simply refusing to accept that this system, this injustice, this pain, was how things had to be. Outside, London settled into its uneasy sleep, dreaming of the world that was and the world that might be. While inside one modest house, two revolutionaries who'd never meant to start a revolution simply stood together and watched the night come on, ready for whatever morning would bring. The clock in Elara's library chimed midnight. Rowan stirred, realizing how long they'd been standing there in comfortable silence. "I should go," he said, though he made no move toward the door. "Let you rest. You've had a long day." "They're all long days now." Elara turned from the window, and in the lamplight he could see the exhaustion etched into her features. But this one ended better than most. "Will you be all right? Alone, I mean. After everything today?" "I'm always alone at night," she said simply. "That's part of independence, learning to be comfortable with your own company, even when the memories get loud." She must have seen something in his face because she added, "I'm fine, Rowan. Really. I've spent 6 months learning how to sleep without someone who might hurt me in the next room. Some nights are harder than others, but I manage." "You shouldn't have to just manage." "But I do. That's reality, and I'm tired of pretending reality is prettier than it is." She moved to the door, opening it, a clear signal. "Go home. Rebuild your library. Write your speeches for Parliament. Tomorrow we fight the next battle, but tonight we both need rest." Rowan paused at the threshold. "The house looks good. Feels like you. It's small. It's perfect." "It's mine," she corrected. "That's what makes it perfect." He smiled at that, understanding what she meant. Not the size or the furnishings or the location, but the simple fact of ownership, her name, her choice, her refuge that no one could take away. "Good night, Elara." "Good night." But as he reached the street, she called out one more time. "Rowan?" He turned back. "Thank you for not making this harder than it needs to be, for understanding that I can care about you and still need space, that I can want partnership without wanting possession." "That's what partnership means," he said. "Building something together without losing yourself in the process." She nodded, and he thought he saw her smile before she closed the door. The walk back to his own house took 20 minutes through quiet streets. When he arrived, the rebuilt wing still smelled of fresh paint and new wood. Nothing like the home it had been, but something better perhaps. Something chosen rather than inherited. Marcus was waiting in the study, feet propped on the new desk. "How'd it go?" "Good. Complicated. Real. That's all anyone can ask for." Marcus stood, stretching. "The reformers want to meet next week. They're drafting legislation about divorce rights. Thought you'd want to be there." "I'll be there." "And Elara?" "We'll probably be leading the meeting, knowing her." Marcus laughed. "Probably. She's become quite the political force. Lady Ashford told me half the women in her social circle are terrified of Elara, and the other half want to be her. She'd hate both reactions equally." "True, but at least they're not trying to destroy her anymore. That's progress." After Marcus left, Rowan stood in his rebuilt study and thought about progress. How slow it was, how painful, how inadequate it felt when you'd seen what Elara had survived, what thousands of women survived daily. But progress nonetheless, real, measurable, worth fighting for. He pulled out paper and began drafting notes for the next round of reforms, working long into the night while across the city, in a house with her name on the deed, Elara did the same. Separate but parallel. Independent but allied. Building a new world, one hard-won law at a time.